Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Let's begin. Take a slow, gentle breath in, and let it drift out, soft and easy, as though the air itself is carrying away your day. Feel the rhythm of your breath, simple and calm, guiding you into stillness. Inhale and notice the coolness of the air as it enters. Exhale and feel warmth leaving your body, taking tension with it. There is nothing you need to do right now. No effort, no plans, no responsibilities. Only this quiet moment, a sanctuary for rest. Notice how your body feels supported. The surface beneath you is strong and steady. You are fully held, safe to release everything you've been carrying. With each breath, allow yourself to sink just a little deeper, as though the bed or the floor beneath you is cradling you with care. Feel your spine lengthening and softening into comfort. Bring your attention to your face. Notice your forehead and let it smooth out completely. Your eyebrows soften and fall into ease. The tiny muscles around your eyes release. Your cheeks grow heavy, your lips gently part. Your jaw relaxes, unhooking from the day's tension. Even your tongue rests peacefully, and your entire face feels serene. Take a slow breath and move your awareness to your neck and shoulders. They may have carried so much today. Let them soften, sink, and surrender to the pull of gravity. Your shoulders drop naturally, melting into the surface beneath you. A warm heaviness spreads through your upper arms, elbows, and forearms. Your hands are limp, resting without effort. Even your fingers are at peace, free of the day's energy. Notice your breathing again. Slow, steady, calm. With every inhale, imagine drawing in soft golden light. And with every exhale, letting go of anything you no longer need. Each breath carries you further into deep relaxation. Bring this gentle attention to your chest. Feel it rise and fall in its own rhythm. Your heartbeat is steady, soothing, a quiet lullaby from within. Every beat, every breath, a signal to your body. It is safe to rest. Now let the wave of calm reach your stomach. Your belly softens, free of any tightness. With every exhale, it releases even more tension. Your back follows, your spine sinking fully into support. From the top of your shoulders down to your lower back, everything is relaxed. The relaxation continues into your hips. They are heavy, grounded, and at ease. Your thighs, which have carried you all day, are now soft and weightless. Your knees and calves follow, unwinding with each breath. Even your ankles and feet let go, your toes gently spreading. Your whole body is now resting in perfect harmony. Imagine a soft golden light appearing just above your head. It shimmers like a warm sunset, comforting and gentle. Slowly it begins to drift down, touching the crown of your head. And the moment it touches, warmth and calm spread through you. Every place the light passes becomes soft, open, and free. It moves over your forehead and eyes, filling them with peace. Over your cheeks, your lips, your jaw. Sliding down into your neck and shoulders, clearing away the last bits of tension. Your arms glow as the light travels to your hands and fingertips. Everything it touches becomes tranquil and still. The light reaches your chest now. It fills your heart with gentle warmth. A comforting glow spreads through your ribs, lungs, and belly. You are safe, supported, and completely at ease. The golden glow drifts to your hips and thighs, down to your knees and calves, over your ankles and into your feet. Your entire body is wrapped in light and serenity, as though you are cocooned in warmth and safety. Take a long, slow inhale. And let it go, feeling your whole body sink even deeper. You are now fully cradled in peace. In your mind, imagine you are lying beneath a vast starry sky. The grass beneath you is soft and cool. The air smells of earth and faint wildflowers. You hear the whisper of a gentle night breeze. It brushes your skin softly, like the touch of a feather. Above, stars begin to twinkle. One by one they appear, filling the sky with light. Each star is calm and constant, a tiny lantern in the dark. The moon rises slowly, bathing the world in silver. Its glow feels like a soft hand resting over you, protecting you. Somewhere nearby, water trickles over smooth stones. A gentle stream sings a lullaby for the night. Every sound around you is part of this soothing symphony. The earth holding you, the sky watching over you, the night wrapping you in safety and calm. Thoughts may drift into your mind, but they are like soft clouds in this endless sky. They float by without effort, disappearing into the distance. You do not need to hold on to anything. You are free to let go, to surrender to stillness. Take one last deep, easy breath in. And release it slowly. Feel the complete weight of your body sinking into rest. Your mind is light, your body heavy, and your heart at peace. You are floating now in the space between wakefulness and sleep, wrapped in warmth, surrounded by comfort, ready to drift into a night of deep, healing rest. Good night. Rest deeply and enjoy tonight's bedtime story. The first thing my aunt left me was a desk. The second was a question with 7 teeth. I didn't expect either to feel heavy. The desk came wrapped in moving blankets the color of storm water, 2 men carrying it with the kind of reverence reserved for pianos and the coffins of strangers. It was late afternoon, the hour when the library's windows catch the worn gold of the sun, and I stood with my keys still in the door as they shouldered it through. I caught a breath of cedar and something like orange oil, and for a second I wasn't 32 or a librarian or a woman with a funeral program folded small in her coat pocket. I was 6 again, peeking into Aunt May's back room while she hunched over this same desk, her shoulders a careful slope as if sheltering something winged and easily startled. "Where would you like it, ma'am?" one mover asked, already angling toward the front windows of my apartment. The floorboards creaked under the desk's carved legs. Each foot ended in a soft curl, like a wave about to turn. "In the corner," I said, pointing to the patch of light where my pothos plant had learned to be brave. "By the bookcase." They set it down with a grunt, flattened the blanket, and stepped back. It fit like it had been waiting. "Sorry for your loss," the other one offered. He looked like he wanted to put a hand on the desk and then thought better of it, as if the grief might be contagious through wood. "Thank you," I said, because that is what you say when there are no words good enough for the new shape of the world. When the door shut and their footsteps faded down the hall, the apartment exhaled into its old quiet. The desk sat in the sunny wedge like a latecomer deciding whether to apologize. I set my bag down and took off my shoes. My toes found the familiar nails that had worked themselves proud of the floorboards years ago. I opened the windows to let in the evening. The gulls, the brine, the particular clink of masts in the marina 2 streets over. The gulls like to yell about whatever gulls yell about. Aunt May used to say they were poor singers, but exceptional poets. On impulse, I turned the radio on low. In the library, I am the person who whispers at whispers. At home, I need the murmur to keep me company. A slow jazz station found me. 2 trumpets crooned to each other. I filled a bowl with water and a small squirt of dish soap and brought a rag out to meet the desk. It was not a fancy thing, not the kind of antique that appears guarded by velvet rope and disapproving docents. It was the kind that had lived a life. Scratches near the drawer pulls, a cigarette burn at the far right where a careless guest must have put down the wrong kind of thought, a softened groove where a right elbow had rested. I laid my palm there, and something in me, some impatient librarian part that can't resist a story out of place, settled. "Hello, old girl," I said. I hadn't known I would say it, but the words arrived faithful and sure. Aunt May's funeral had been 3 days earlier. It was small, coastal, windy. I'd carried one of those hardy flowers that look like they're always braced for weather. Someone told me the name, and the name disappeared seconds later as if chased. Everyone kept describing May as warm and private in the same breath, and I thought, yes, a kettle and a locked door. She used to write letters at this desk, and by write letters, I mean she used to lean so close to the paper I couldn't be sure where her face ended and the page began. The back room of her house faced the sea and was a continuous, fickle light. Her letters were always long, always folded in halves and then thirds, and always sealed with wax in the shape of a small shell. She never told me what she wrote or to whom. The addresses on the envelopes were neat, but never legible from where I was permitted to stand. I wrung the rag out and worked in slow circles, lifting dust that was more memory than dirt. The polish woke the wood's grain into something like water. I traced the desk's edges with a fingertip. There were 2 wide drawers at the bottom, 3 small ones lined up like teeth under the writing surface, and a little cubby with pigeonholes where bills and lists once lived. I opened each drawer gently, ready for the crumb of a past life to scuttle. The bottom left held nothing but a thin drift of sand in the corner, like a secret that hadn't wiped its feet. The bottom right contained a single pencil, unsharpened, and a hard pearlescent button that had somehow divorced itself from its garment and found asylum here. I smiled. "Of course," I told the button. "And you only talk to objects like that when you live alone, or when your grief wears your voice like a borrowed sweater." The 3 small drawers slid smooth, reluctant to make a scene. The middle one caught slightly and then gave. Inside, tucked like a promise against the back, lay a handkerchief embroidered with blue initials, M.A., and a smudge of a tea ring that had survived a wash. I pressed the cloth to my face and breathed it in. I could almost find her there. Her clean soap, her briny curtains, the unaccountable spice she added to everything. Cardamom, I remembered. She said it made coffee mischievous. It was the writing surface that surprised me, though. A sloped panel hinged at the top, the kind that folds down to make a lap of wood where there had been none. I wanted to touch it the way you want to pet the nose of a horse you don't know yet. My fingers found the lip and, without any force I could measure, pressed. Something clicked. Not in the expected place, but inside the desk, as if a mouse had snapped the world's smallest trap. I froze, my breath perched on the edge of my teeth. I tried to unhear it. I'm good at that, ignoring the things that will make work for me. I set the rag down and tilted my head. There it was again, the faintest suggestion of something unlocked. Librarians learn to listen to the hush differentials of every room. You can hear when a secret has decided to breathe. May, I said, because I am sentimental to the marrow. What did you do? I pressed the lip again, slower. This time the click registered under my palm like a cat's purr. Curiosity knocked on its own door. I explored the interior, the little cubbies, the shallow drawer meant for fountain pens. The smooth underside of the writing surface gave away nothing until my nail found a seam where no seam should be. The wood there felt faintly warmer, as if it had been softly held not so long ago. I pushed, and something yielded with the sound of a very small sigh. A section of molding, a decorative strip I'd thought purely ornamental, sprang forward a fraction of an inch. I slid it out, a panel no bigger than my hand, thin as a secret. Behind it a cavity waited. Inside, wrapped in tissue that had aged to the color of tea, lay a neat bundle bound with twine. My heart skittered in a way the cardiologist would have disliked. The room went into that heightened focus where all the normal objects become background actors. The gulls dimmed, the radio grew watery, the plant paused mid-growth. I lifted the bundle out and placed it carefully on the writing surface. The tissue crinkled like winter grass underfoot. The twine, looped twice and knotted with a flourish I recognized as my aunt's. She had always tied bowlines into shoelaces and made even bread bags look permanently seaworthy. I didn't reach for the scissors. Instead, I bent to the knot and worried it loose with my thumbnail the way she'd taught me to undo what could be undone without a blade. The twine came apart obediently. The tissue opened. I had the sensation of unwrapping something that was both a gift and an indictment. 7 small keys blinked up at me. They were not all the same. One was brassy and fat-bellied with teeth like a parade of tiny soldiers. Another was slim and silver and almost shy. One had a little scallop shell worked into its bow, and one's bow was just a plain ovoid, useful and unremarkable the way useful things often are. Each hung from a short loop of cotton string, and to each string was attached a paper tag. The tags had rough corners as if May had cut them herself from a thicker sheet. The edges had browned slightly, and a faint perfume of old notebooks drifted off them. Her handwriting, I would have known it in the dark. Letters that had learned to sail through weather, quick and certain curves. The least fussy capital G I have ever loved. Each tag held a word or two in that steady ink. Garden Gate, read the first. Seashell, said the second. Tuesday. Maple Street. For you. And two others whose tags I did not turn yet, because it felt like opening all your birthday gifts at once when you are alone in the room. I reached for a chair with one hand, because my legs were less confident than my curiosity. I sat. The keys lay in their nest of tissue like fish in a shallow tide pool. I didn't know where to look first. I touched the garden gate key. It was warm, not from the apartment, but with something that felt like the inside of a story. I see you, I told the air. I'm not ready, but I see you. Aunt May's will had been clean. The house by the sea to be sold, and the money split 3 ways among her 3 nieces, of which I am the middle and therefore uniquely forgettable. Her furniture to be given to friends, to whoever had a use or a love for it. The desk, specifically, to me. I had read that line twice. Not because I doubted it, but because sometimes seeing your name in someone else's hand is enough to make you cry in a way the body doesn't announce. What do you do when your aunt, who made you peppermint tea when you failed your driver's test and sent you postcards with small drawings of birds when you moved into your first broom closet apartment, leaves you a puzzle? You do what librarians do. You label the parts you can and leave a space for the parts you cannot. I took out my phone and opened the Notes app. I made a list. Garden Gate? Where? Which garden? Maze, community, cemetery. Seashell. Beach, object, store. Seashell Cafe on Elm. Tuesday. Day of week, person named Tuesday. Remember book with character named Tuesday. Maple Street, what number, which city? Ours, Port May, Boston. For you, for me? Oh, unknown, unknown. I put the phone face down. The jazz on the radio had given way to something with a piano that sounded like a quiet apology. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stood to fetch a small box. One of those wooden cigar cases I use for tea bags now that I mostly drink herbal out of loyalty to my sleep. I lined it with a square of flannel torn from a shirt that had finally given up, then lifted each key and set it down in the box with slow attention, the way you put ornaments away in January when you don't want to rush winter off your doorstep. Garden Gate, I said out loud, lifting that key again when it was already settled. It was brassy, as if made from a melted afternoon. The bow had an oval opening big enough for a finger. The teeth were shallow, cut with an old machine that hadn't wanted to be precise. It felt like something that would prefer to turn in a lock that had a history of sticking. I could feel the faint tack of polish on my fingers. The tag swung and hit my knuckle. I held it by its string and read the letters again. Garden Gate. We had a garden when I was small. Everyone did. Coastal soil pretends it's sand until peas prove otherwise. May's garden lived behind her house in a square the color of gravelly chocolate. Her gate had been a splintery thing that squeaked rain or shine. She used to keep it bungeed closed because the wind favored mischief. I pictured myself standing there now, adult and solemn, holding a brassy key to a gate that had never once in its life asked for a lock. "What are you doing to me?" I asked her, because that was easier than asking myself. If grief leaves your hands empty, curiosity gives them something to hold. That's how I've always made it through the quiet anyway, by finding the thread end and pulling gently. I carried the cigar box to the bookcase and set it on the second shelf where I keep the books that don't mind being interrupted. The field guides, the essay collections with spines like the edges of seashells, the travelogues with their terrible, irresistible maps. The keys looked at home there and also like they were impatient with my dawdling. I put the polish away and washed my hands at the kitchen sink. The window over the sink gave me a slice of evening sky like a torn page. A boy on a skateboard tripped over a crack and turned it into a dance. The gulls had grown quieter, as if they were writing drafts. I made tea. Cardamom, because why not be faithful now? The kettle's whistle felt like a small animal trying to be brave. I poured the heat into a mug and brought it back to the desk, which had shifted in my mind from furniture to companion. I set the mug down on a coaster like a person who loves their life, and then I took out a pen and a blank index card and wrote, "Aunt May's desk, inventory, because a librarian's heart is heavy with lists. Writing surface with hidden latch, secret panel, secret cavity tissue paper. Twine 5 keys with tags. Garden gate seashell, Tuesday. Maple Street for you handkerchief, button pencil under notes," I wrote. Keys appear used. Likely not symbolic only, possibly to actual locks. Where? Who? Why? I blew on the ink to set it. The desk offered up a faint smell of orange oil and salt. I placed the index card in the center pigeonhole like a map in a navigator's reach. Sometimes, late at night, an idea arrives with the softness of a cat. This one padded in while I wasn't guarding the door. The day of the week. Tuesday. I pictured an appointment book, the kind my grandmother used to keep, with lines to write things like bread and dentist and forgive yourself. I had seen one when we cleaned May's kitchen drawers, me and my cousins, trying not to turn the whole thing into a wake. I hadn't thought to save it. I wished I had. I set my mug down. The tea tasted like an old friend who had shaved his beard but kept his laugh. I smiled, despite everything. It felt like a betrayal to be happy in the light of a person's absence. And yet joy kept finding the gap beneath the door. I am, by most measures, a methodical woman. But I am also the kind of woman who cries at commercials for canoe rentals. If you tell me a story wants me, I will go. I picked up Garden Gate. The tag's hole had been reinforced with a tiny ring of brown paper. May had done things like that. Small, considerate fixes no one would see, but everyone would benefit from. I threaded the loop around my finger, letting the key lie in my palm like a sleeping fish. It wasn't heavy, not physically, but it tugged at me with a tug that felt like a childhood Saturday. A little ache, a little promise. I thought of walking the coast road to her house in the morning, knocking on a door that wasn't ours anymore. The realtor's sign had gone up already. A cheerful stake in the lawn, a phone number like a taunt. Inside, strangers would lay their measuring tapes against the windows that had framed our lives. But the garden was still the garden until someone had the nerve to make it otherwise. The gate was still the gate. Maybe, ridiculous to even think it, maybe there was a lock there now. Maybe she'd installed one the way she installed things that seemed unnecessary until the day they kept out the worst of a wind. I sipped, then set the cup down and opened the bottom left drawer of the desk. I half expected another stash to reveal itself. Instead, I found the sand again, and a paper clip bent into a shape that might once have been a star. I smiled, a small animal of a smile. I skimmed my palm across the drawer's floor and thought of the beach. The word seashell pulled in the line of my attention. It wasn't just any shell. Aunt May's wax seals had been scallops, but there had been one shell she kept separately, on the windowsill above the sink. A conch with a broken lip and a vein of pink inside. She used to hold it to my ear and ask what the sea was saying to me that day. I'd make something up. She never told me I was wrong. I closed the drawer softly. In the living room, the light had threaded itself into the plant leaves, and the pothos looked like a person telling a secret to the wall. I should have eaten dinner. I should have answered the text from my older sister asking if I'd picked up the photographs from the funeral home. I should have taken the recycling down. Instead, I stayed with the desk. I straightened the handkerchief. I turned the slim silver key labeled Maple Street sideways so its teeth wouldn't catch on the tissue. I watched the way the tag shadows overlapped like fish in shallow water. The radio cut to the news briefly. Weather, a road closure on the causeway, a human interest story about someone who had taught their dog to ring a bell when it wanted affection. I clicked the dial off. It felt rude to the keys to let the world talk at them while they were trying to be specific. "Okay," I said into the familiar quiet. "Okay." It is one of my favorite words. It doesn't promise delight or even relief. It simply agrees to proceed. I took out a fresh index card and wrote across it in big letters, "Questions." Underneath, I let them fall. Why 7? Why now? Who else knows? What happens when I follow them? Which one first? As if the desk had been listening, the last question vibrated in me like a tuning fork. I looked at the line of keys again, their small, stubborn mouths. I thought of starting with "for you," and how dangerously intimate that felt. I thought of Tuesday with its tidy trickster energy, and Maple Street with its practical clarity. But it was Garden Gate that continued to pull, the way a certain book calls your name from a shelf while pretending to speak to everyone. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the feeling that if I put this key into the right place, the whole room of myself would exhale. I held it up to the window's last scrap of light. Dust rose around it like applause. "I'll go in the morning," I told the desk. And the desk, being a desk and therefore wiser than I am about patience, kept its counsel. I cleaned up the tissue and tucked it back into the secret cavity, because some part of me believes in closing circles. I slid the panel back in and pressed the lip until I heard the soft catch take. I arranged the cigar box on the shelf where I could see it even from the kitchen. I wrote myself a note and stuck it on the door. "Bring keys." I set an alarm called Garden for a time that qualified as early for a librarian who has spent her adult life fighting to stay awake until the library's closing bell. Then, because grief is a creature that hates to be left alone, I sat down on the floor with my back against the desk and let it come. It was not a storm this time, not the drowning of the first night or the abrasion of the second day. It was something steadier, a tide that knew its moon. I cried in a neat librarian way, and then in a less neat niece way. When I finished, I folded the handkerchief in half and then in half again, and put it under my cheek like a prayer. The apartment had grown darker. Outside, somebody laughed too loud and then apologized. The kettle clicked as the last of its heat found somewhere to be useful. My phone glowed with messages I wasn't ready to read. On the bookcase, the keys waited, small and metal and not at all metaphors, and somehow exactly that. I stood, eventually, with the grunt of a woman who had both sat too long and known it. I washed my face. I brushed my teeth. I wrote in my journal, "Date Tuesday," my pen said without consulting me, and I looked back at the keys and laughed because of course it was. I turned off lights until only the glow above the kitchen sink remained. A nightlight for the grown-up child I honestly still am. I walked to the desk once more because I couldn't help it. I touched the smooth edge of the writing surface with my right hand and felt the faint click under my skin, the memory of the latch. "Good night, May," I said. "I'm going." Back in bed, the sheets cool and lifted by the ocean's breeze, I thought of the garden, the dirt under my nails, the particular ache in my lower back after turning the soil, the gate's squeal. I pictured myself standing there with the key tomorrow morning, ridiculous and reverent and a little hope-drunk. Would there be a lock, a box, a person, a message? The questions circled me like patient birds. For the first time since the funeral, they did not feel like a swarm. Before sleep collected me, I let myself remember something I had not let myself touch in years. The feel of Aunt May's hand around mine as we walked back from the shore, her fingers cool and sure. We barely spoke on those walks. She had taught me that silence could be a kind of generosity. Halfway home, she would give my hand a small squeeze that meant everything you'd hope it meant, and nothing that would break either of us. I did not know then that a day would come when I'd stand in a sunlit room holding a key with my name on it. A key that wasn't labeled for you, and yet somehow was too. Morning would come. The gate would be there, or it wouldn't. The lock would accept the key, or it wouldn't. Either way, the question already had its teeth in me. I turned garden gate over in my hand one last time in my mind, felt its weight, the shallow bite of its teeth, the vellum scrape of the tag, and slept with the tug of it in my palm, as if my aunt had stitched a small invisible thread between the desk and my heart and told it, in that steady voice of hers, to follow. Some doors open with a sound you never forget. This one groaned like it had been waiting for me since the day I left. I stood in Aunt May's backyard, the garden gate key sweating in my palm. The morning air was thick with the scent of wet soil and salt, the kind of day the ocean seems to breathe louder than the town. The grass had grown up to my knees, wild and soft, bending under the weight of last night's dew. The path that once ran clean from the porch to the far fence had nearly vanished beneath the tangle of green, but I knew where to look. I'd walked it barefoot more times than I could count as a child, chasing shadows or following the low hum of my aunt's voice when she gardened past the gate. The gate itself stood at the very end of the yard, half swallowed by the ivy she'd once tamed with strict scissors. Time had loosened its grip. The wood frame sagged against the weight of rusted iron bars, its latch frozen shut in a stubborn curl. I brushed a strand of hair from my cheek and stepped closer, heart beating in the peculiar rhythm of recognition and suspense. This wasn't the gate to her vegetable garden that had been open to anyone who wanted to taste a strawberry before breakfast. This was different. I'd never been past it. Even as a child, she'd say, "Not yet, Alexandria," whenever I'd ask. And now here I was, 32, standing in the same spot with a key tagged in her own hand. I knelt to fit it into the lock. The brass teeth slid in with surprising ease, as if the years hadn't touched it. I turned it slowly, expecting resistance, but the mechanism gave with a dry click that traveled up my spine. My fingers tightened on the cool iron as I pushed the gate open. The hinges screamed in protest, and beyond them the garden fell silent. No gulls, no breeze, no distant hum of a car on the street. just the sudden stillness of a place that had been holding its breath. It wasn't large, this hidden corner. The ground was a patchwork of moss and earth, shaded by the drooping arms of an old magnolia tree. Its blossoms, though out of season, had left a scatter of browned petals across the grass. A stone bench crouched beneath it, its surface mottled with lichen. On the bench sat a wooden box, weathered to the color of driftwood. I stepped inside, letting the gate fall shut behind me with a dull clang. The air was different here, cooler, greener, threaded with the faint sweetness of something long faded. I reached the bench and set my hand on the box. The wood was warm from the thin spill of sunlight that found its way through the magnolia branches. Its lid was held closed with a simple brass clasp, tarnished to a deep green. It took both hands to open it. Inside, the first thing I saw was a photograph. Me, no more than 5, sitting cross-legged in the grass with a daisy chain in my lap. My cheeks were round with the fullness of childhood, my hair a mess from the wind. Behind me, the magnolia stood exactly as it did now, though younger, its trunk smoother, its branches reaching higher as if in mid-stretch. I swallowed hard and picked up the next photograph. This one showed me chasing bubbles, barefoot, my head thrown back in a laugh I could almost hear. Aunt May's shadow fell across the frame, her hand holding the bubble wand. She must have taken it herself. Underneath the photographs lay a single pressed flower, a magnolia bloom, its petals browned and delicate, carefully flattened between sheets of parchment. A small card was tucked beside it. May's handwriting was there, slanted and sure. This is where we planted your first memory. I sat down on the bench without thinking, the moss cool beneath my bare ankles. My thumb brushed over the edge of the card, planted my first memory. The phrase lingered in me like the aftertaste of something sweet. I looked up at the magnolia, its branches shifting gently in the breeze. A faint recollection stirred, a day when May knelt beside me here, showing me how to dig a small hole, how to tuck a seed into the earth like you were telling it a secret. I must have been 3 or 4. I remember her voice, low and patient, explaining that some things take time, and that waiting can be as important as planting. It was hazy, like a dream you aren't sure belongs to you. But now, holding the pressed bloom, the edges of it sharpened, the smell of wet soil, the feel of her hand covering mine as we pressed the dirt back in place, the sound of her saying, "Someday you'll come back and remember this." And now, here I was. The realization came quietly, but hit deep. These keys weren't random. They weren't just curiosities left behind in a desk. May was leading me somewhere, not just through places, but through time. I ran my fingers along the edge of the wooden box. There was space beneath the photographs and flower. I lifted them gently, and beneath I found a small envelope. Inside was another note, no more than a sentence. 1 down, 6 to go. Each will bring you closer to the whole of yourself. The whole of myself. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For years I'd told myself I knew exactly who I was. Quiet, careful, built for the order of library shelves and the predictability of ink on paper. But maybe May had seen something I'd forgotten or hidden from myself without knowing. I set the note back in the box, replaced the photographs and flower, and closed the lid. Sitting there, I let the silence of the hidden garden soak into me. My aunt's absence still felt like a missing tooth in my life, sharp and strange. But here, she was everywhere, in the tilt of the bench, in the magnolia's sturdy patience, in the way the box had been left out in the open, trusting I'd find it only when I was ready. A gull cried somewhere beyond the fence, and the sound seemed to loosen the knot in my throat. I reached for the gate, the key still in the lock, and turned back toward the house. The grass brushed my shins, and the sun had shifted just enough to warm my shoulders. I knew now. This was only the beginning. May had left me a map without lines, one that would take me to places I'd forgotten I'd ever stood. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt the pull of something other than grief. I felt the pull of discovery. The ocean said my name the moment the key turned. Not out loud. Nothing dramatic like a film score rising or waves spelling letters on the sand. But in that quiet, undeniable way the sea has of answering questions you're not brave enough to ask out loud. The tag on the key read Seashell, and it had been tapping against the inside of my coat pocket the whole walk down Bay Street like a soft insistence. By the time I reached the boardwalk, it felt less like an object and more like a pulse. The beach looked like itself and not itself. Summer crowds were months away. All that lingered on the early morning shoreline were the usuals, joggers with red ears, a woman in a wool hat walking a dog that wore its joy like a neon vest, and 2 gulls conducting a meeting of terrible importance involving an abandoned sandwich wrapper. The sky was a strip of pale pewter, the kind that promised weather and then pretended not to know you. I stood at the top of the stairs and let the smell of salt and kelp and distant fuel slip into my lungs as if it had a right to live there. May and I had collected this air together every summer I can remember. She used to say, "Breathe deeper, Alexandria. The ocean only tells the truth to people who show up." I'd roll my eyes because I was 8 and then 12 and then 15, but I'd breathe deeper anyway because she asked me to in that steady, almost mischievous voice. I tucked my scarf closer and stepped down onto the sand. Somewhere a bell buoy rang, and the sound fell into my bones like it had been there all along. "Okay," I told the key in my pocket. because apparently I've settled into life as a woman who speaks to metal. Show me. I walked the line where the tide had recently shrugged and retreated, the place where the sea leaves its inventory. Seaweed like green cursive, a length of pale driftwood gnawed to velvet, a shell that had once been pink and now wore the polite beige of age. The wind pushed at my hair and made conversation with the pages of my coat. Searching for a specific seashell on a beach is an exercise in becoming a child again. Everything looks like it might be the thing you want, and then it isn't. And somehow that doesn't feel like failure. I scanned the rack line for a clue, a mark, a sign that my aunt had been here. And of course there were signs everywhere, because she had loved this place like an extra lung. It took me a few long minutes to remember the part of the story I'd skipped in my eagerness. May had a storage shed just beyond the dunes. A dozen low sheds hunkered behind the dunes at the north end of the beach, their doors painted with cheerful colors that salt had been chewing on for years. Lagoon blues and drowsy yellows, and one violet door that never once matched the sky. Most were used by the lifeguards in summer or by windsurfers and families who had somehow secured the allotted permits back when the town was smaller and favors were as common as tide charts. May's door had always been a deep teal, matte against the sun, with a hand-painted scallop shell at the center instead of a number. I swear I could find it blindfolded. I slid my hand around the drift fence, let the dune grass tickle my ankles through my jeans, and climbed the sandy path until all the sounds of town shook off like a shawl. There it was. Teal softened by years into a color the sea might choose to be when it was tired of being blue. The scallop remained, a little chipped, a lot proud. A new padlock hung beneath it, old enough to be respectable, but not so old as to be stubborn. It was small, brass, and familiar in the way a stranger sometimes carries a friend's laugh. I reached into my pocket and brought the seashell key into the light. "Let's see then," I said. The key slid into the padlock like it had missed it. For a second, I wanted to be the kind of person who deserves this kind of grace. I turned. The mechanism offered that dry click of cooperation, and the lock fell soft into my palm. I pushed the door open, and a smell of rope, salt, and something like old lemons washed over me. The interior was not fancy. A bench along the back, 2 shelves nailed up with conviction, a coil of thick line that had learned the shape of the wall, a bucket with a crack in it, and a small wooden chest on the bench near the window. Dust played in the slant of light that made it past the salt-clouded glass. I could see May here, arms bare, hair up, rubbing oil into the wood of a paddle or untangling a kite string or tucking something away where only the patient would find it. "Hi," I said to the air, because grief makes you friendly with ghosts. The chest drew me as if it were humming. It was the size of a stack of library dictionaries. the kind of box that wants to be heavy and is. I ran my fingers over its lid. Someone, May, had carved a line of tiny waves along the edge, each one a small gesture of persistence. The latch was simple brass, no key required. I opened it. Inside, rows of seashells lay in shallow compartments. Scallops, moon snails, augurs, a fan of razor clams, the odd bit of coral the currents had argued into our waters and then abandoned. Each shell had a tiny paper label tucked beneath it, steady handwriting giving each year a home. 1998, 1999, 2000, all the way up to last summer. The years of my childhood and the years after it. A life measured in low tide. I touched the scallop labeled 1998. The shell was cream with a blush of old rose at the hinge, the ridges worn smooth. 1998, the summer I learned to swim without pretending I wasn't afraid. I remembered the bruise on my shin from the rock I hadn't seen, how May had said, "Worth it," with a grin that outsparkled the water. 2003 was a moon snail with a small, perfect hole drilled near the center. Oyster catcher's lunch, May would have said. That was the summer I grew too tall too fast and then pretended I didn't mind. We ate fries that tasted of vinegar and napkins and laughed with our mouths full because some griefs take their time finding you. 2011 was a broken whelk. The label beneath it had a tiny star drawn next to the year. That was the summer I almost moved away and didn't. The summer the library hours got cut and I moved to noon shifts and late afternoons and learned to love the way the town breathes at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. My eyes stung in that way that says salt belongs inside all of us. Underneath the last row of shells lay a slim, long envelope sealed with wax the color of the pink inside a conch. The seal was pressed with a scallop, the same shape May had always used. The sight of it stirred something that felt like hunger and homesickness, and the first page of a book I know I'll carry in my bag for months. The envelope had my name on it. Alexandria, in May's hand. No middle name, because she had always thought middle names were for ceremonies, and she considered letters to be more alive than that. I sat on the bench and held the envelope like a fragile thing with a heart. My thumb found the wax and hesitated. Breaking it felt like crossing a river I didn't yet know how to swim. But keys turn and doors open, and letters want to be read. The seal gave way with a soft crack that sounded a little like a shell underfoot, and I slid the page free. Her handwriting again, like a wind steady enough to sail by. My dearest Alex, if you are here, it means you've let the sea call you by your name. Good. It remembers you and you remember it. That's the only contract worth keeping sometimes. This little shed has never been about storage. It's a listening room. Whenever life felt heavy, I came here and let the ocean do half my thinking. I'm loaning you that trick. When you don't know where to put your heart, bring it to the shoreline and let it be noisy for a while. The ocean doesn't mind. It's fluent in all our racket. In the chest, you'll find a year for every summer we shared, and some we only shared in postcards. Pick one if you like. Hold it. Let it tell you who you were then, and who you still are that you might have misplaced. You are allowed to keep any shell that insists on going home with you. The rest will be happy to wait right here. If this year is heavy, take the weight to the water. Listen until the words inside you get sanded down to something kind. All my love, always. M. P.S. There's a thermos on the top shelf. It's probably empty. Fill it next time with whatever comforts you. Everything tastes better at the edge of the world. I read the letter twice, then a third time, because some instructions want to be braced into the ribs. Listen to the ocean when life feels heavy. It sounded like something a person says when she knows her advice won't always reach you on time. It sounded like a lighthouse you can carry. I pressed the paper to my chest and sat there long enough to feel time grow porous. Outside the shed, the wind brushed along the slats like fingers across a washboard. A gull complained about nothing and everything. Somewhere distant, a child laughed, and I could tell from the shape of the sound that they were wearing a hat their mother had insisted on. I slid the letter back into its envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of my coat beside the key. It was a close, almost tender fit. I lifted the chest carefully and found beneath it a small penciled note on the bench itself. Sand sweeps easier than sorrow. Use a hand broom. The ghost of a grin tugged at my mouth. I looked around and found a short broom on a hook by the door. Bristles splayed like a burst of grass. I swept a little, not because the floor needed it, but because the action felt like agreeing with the day. When I stepped back onto the dune path, I carried one shell with me. 2007, a thick white clam shell with a cinnamon stripe. The summer I learned to drive and failed the first test because I cried trying to parallel park and then laughed so hard I cried again. May had taken me for ice cream and said, "I don't like parallel parking either. That's why we live in a town with diagonal spaces." I cupped the shell in my palm like an apology accepted across time. I didn't walk back toward town. I turned left and cut down to the shore, the path I'd run 100 times when my legs were shorter and my lungs newer. The sand took my weight and then forgave me. The tide made a soft argument at my toes. I walked. The letter was warm against my heart. I slid it out and read it again as I moved, the words reassembling the older scaffolding of me, the parts that know how to be quiet without disappearing. Listen to the ocean when life feels heavy. I lowered the page and let the water do the talking. It spoke in lists and exhalations. It said, "Here and here and here." It said, "Now." My grief, which had been an anvil on my sternum since the funeral, shifted, not smaller exactly. but rounder, something I could roll with my foot along the shore instead of dragging like a broken net. I felt it soften around the edges in a way that made room for other feelings to sit down. I stopped at the jetty where we used to count crabs and dare each other to touch the colder water on the dark side. The rocks wore their usual slick green fur. The horizon did the horizon thing, keeping its distance and promising to never betray me with sudden kindness. I tucked the shell into my pocket and let my hands be free. A man stopped a little way down the beach to throw a ball for his dog. The dog ran flat out like the earth had been waiting for this exact sprint. The ball arced, the dog blurred, and when it came lolloping back, it shook itself near the shoreline with a vigor that sent up a jeweled spray. The man laughed. It sounded like it had been a while since he had, and that he was grateful to have remembered how. I walked on. Pebbles clicked under my shoes like a typewriter I didn't have to fix. I thought of the garden gate and the pressed flower. I thought of the desk at home with its secret panel and patient wood. A trail of memories, I'd told myself yesterday, but I hadn't understood the generosity of it. May wasn't only giving me the past, she was reintroducing me to myself in places where the world had made me thinner. "Hi," I said to the sea, which is either mortal folly or exactly the point. "I miss her." A wave slid up as if to put a hand on my ankle. Another rolled in behind it like a friend who doesn't ask if you're okay because the answer wouldn't help. A small, ridiculous laugh escaped me. I wiped at my face and discovered I was already crying in the comfortable, leaky way I have when no one's judging. The wind tugged my scarf and then tucked it back, polite. I found the flat place where the fishermen dragged their kayaks down and sat. The letter rested on my knees, the envelope's broken seal like an old mouth opening to say something wise for the 11th time. I traced the scallop impression with my thumb. Listen when life feels heavy. The instruction wasn't complicated. It only required honesty and a coastline. I could manage both. The sunlight slipped cleaner through the clouds, and the water brightened to a color I never trust to name properly, because it changes while you're saying it. A group of kids in rolled-up jeans waded out and squealed at the cold like it was both insult and blessing. One of them picked up a rock and held it high, triumphant for reasons private and absolute. A little gust lifted the edge of the letter page, and before I could pin it, the wind borrowed the whole thing. For one knife-still second, my heart lurched, already at the image of it tumbling into the surf and dissolving into something poetic and frankly infuriating. The page flapped, skipped, and then dropped just shy of the rack line like it had decided to be generous. I scrambled after it and caught it with both hands, laughing out loud. The kind of laugh that surprised me by ringing clear. I pressed the letter to my chest again, harder. "Okay," I told it. "I'm listening." On the way back toward the boardwalk, I let myself walk slower than a purpose would require. I noticed the tiny scatter of translucent jellies at the lip of tide, the way the wind stitched the foam into lace. I noticed that my shoulders had unclenched without asking my permission, that my breath had lengthened as if it had taken off stiff shoes. I noticed that the hollow place that had been echoing inside me since the call from my cousin now had a bench in it, and I could sit there sometimes instead of pacing. At the dunes, I turned once more and looked out. You can't look back at the ocean. It looks back at you and steals the moment by making it feel like both of you looked forward instead. I waved anyway. More later, I told it, because if letters are contracts, then waves are appointments. Back at the shed, I returned the padlock and turned the seashell key with a satisfaction that warmed my fingers. I left the chest as I'd found it, rows of years shining in their soft, chalky way. I kept 2007 in my pocket, a legal theft sanctioned by a woman I trusted to make rules I actually wanted to keep. I slid the envelope into my coat again and felt the calm weight of it, as if words could be a kind of ballast and I was a small boat that had finally remembered its keel. On the walk home, the town felt sharper in its edges and kinder in its corners. The cafe windows held cinnamon steam. The hardware store had a sign about nails that made no sense and absolute sense. An old man tipped his cap at no one in particular and hit everyone equally. I passed the library and peered through the glass. Our big front table empty at this hour. A stack of returns waiting to be let back where they belonged. I made a mental note to bring in a small bowl, put a few shells on the circulation desk where people are apt to leave with a book and accidentally take a little tide with them. Touch the coast, the sign could read, then go home. At my apartment, the desk waited in its wedge of light. I propped the door open with my hip and stepped in, sudden tears almost taking me by surprise. It looked less like furniture and more like a harbor, and I thought, that's not a metaphor. That's an angle of wood in sunlight designed by someone who understood the tide of human shoulders. I set the letter down, smoothed it once, the way you might smooth a child's hair after they've run into your arms, and opened the secret panel with the easy press my hand was already learning. I placed the seashell key back into the cigar box with the others and sat for a long breath. Then I did what May would have done. I wrote. On an index card, under my inventory notes, I made a new heading. Seashell, Findings. Shed behind North Dunes, teal door with scallop. Padlock opened with key. Seashell. Chest of shells, each labeled by year, 1998, last summer. Letter from May. Listen to the ocean when life feels heavy. Personal takeaway. Grief softened at shoreline. Keep 2007 clam, permission implied. Actions. Return to shed when needed. Bring thermos. Consider bowl of shells at library. I paused, pen above paper, and added one more line, which felt both small and impossible. Status. Being cared for, even now. The room held steady around me while I let those words settle. The radiator clinked its friendly clinks. A neighbor upstairs played a piano scale, the halting kind that means either a child or a grown person has decided to begin again. I pressed the index card into the pigeonhole and sat back. It's strange the way a note in a dead woman's hand can make you feel more alive. Stranger still to realize the living haven't lost their power just because they've moved off the map, you know. I held 2007 in my palm and remembered sunburn and an orange popsicle and a feeling like possibility had learned my mailing address. Outside, a gull shouted the gull equivalent of a sonnet. I laughed at it and with it, and because of it. I poured water into the kettle and reached automatically for the cardamom. When the whistle rose, I found the thermos I keep meaning to donate and washed it with a care I usually save for glass. Tomorrow or the next day I'd bring it to the shed and sit on the bench and do as instructed. I'd listen. I'd let the ocean take the weight for a while. I'd return the favor by returning often. For now, I carried my cup to the desk, sat, and wrote Aunt May a thank you she would never read, and that somehow she already had. Then I leaned my forearms on the wood and let the edges of me go soft, the way water does when it no longer needs to pretend to be anything else. The keys waited in their box with an attention that felt polite rather than urgent. Tuesday, one tag read. Maple Street, said another. For you, whispered the one that I both did and did not dare to touch. I reached out and brushed the Tuesday key with the back of my finger. It was cool and patient and entirely sure of itself. Soon, I told it. I'm learning to listen first. The ocean kept speaking even here, miles away. The sound tucked under traffic and kettle, layered beneath my breath. I could feel it. A steady hush, a long inhale, a long exhale. I pressed my palm to the desk's lip, felt the faint click of the hidden latch as if the wood was nodding yes. For the first time since the phone call, I didn't measure my life by what I'd lost. I measured it by what I was finding. 7 small keys, a garden gate, a teal door, a letter in a pocket, a shell in a hand, a coastline willing to hold my noise until it sanded itself into a song. I drank my tea. I held the shell. I listened. And grief, which had been an anchor that forgot it was attached to a boat, remembered. It didn't leave. It just rode along, quieter, as if someone older and wiser had taken the other oar. Thank you, I said to the empty room that wasn't empty at all. The ocean answered in the radiator, in the stairwell, in the thin autumn light that decided just then to brighten the very edge of the desk, and I answered back, not with words, but with the simple, surprising act of breathing all the way down. Some doors don't creak, they exhale, like the room behind them was holding its breath just for you. The lock on the Maple Street shop did exactly that when the key turned. A dry click, a soft sigh, the weight of the door settling back into its hinges as though it remembered my aunt's hand and decided mine would do. The brass tag swung against my fingers. Maple Street, in May's quick, seaworthy script. And I had the uncanny sense that I hadn't found the shop so much as the shop had found me. I'd passed this stretch of maple 100 times and never registered the narrow storefront beside the seamstress's window. In daylight, Maple Street is a procession of useful. A shoe repair with a bell like a laugh, a barber pole that spins whether anyone's watching or not, the grocery where the apples flirt shamelessly with the door. The little shop sat between them, shy, a deeper shadow inside shadows, with old lace curtains drawn and a painted sign half faded to suggestion. When I craned close, I could make out the ghost of letters, T, and beneath it in smaller paint, with company. I stood on the sidewalk with the key warm in my palm and tongued the word once in my mouth. Company, like a lozenge that dissolves slow and useful. The bell above the door gave a surprised chime when I stepped inside. Dust eddied in a spill of light from the high front windows, and then calmed as if remembering its choreography. The smell caught me at once and didn't let go. Dried leaves and old citrus, a hum of cinnamon, the ghost of honey, and something floral that felt like it had an opinion. It smelled like time well spent, like patience. The place had been asleep, but not abandoned. Shelves lined the walls, close set, each holding rows of glass jars with dull tin lids and hand-cut labels tied with twine. A low counter stretched along the back, scarred and friendly, where a kettle sat on a small two-burner stove and a clutter of infusers waited like metal blossoms. A chalkboard listed blends in a handwriting I knew, May's, though the chalk had softened from certainty to gray suggestion. Harbor Gray, Solace, Third Tide Black, Orchard Dusk, Storm's End. Someone had doodled a teacup with steam rising in soft spirals. Someone had written, Welcome, then gone over it again and again until the W had become a small thicket. Tea with company, I said under my breath, and just like that the bell over the door made meaning of itself. I closed the door behind me, propped it with a wedge of wood shaped like a whale, and slid the Maple Street key into the pocket of my coat with the other 2 keys already there. It felt like slipping a thought into a crowded conversation. There was dust, yes, an honest layer that made the jars a little shy and the countertop a little matte. But everything else spoke of being loved, and recently enough for love to still be in the room. A guest book lay open on the counter, the kind with thick paper that makes pens behave like their better selves. I bent over it, already able to picture May's hand guiding a person to the right page and the right pen with the right quiet sentence to coax the right words out. I read, May 17th, best cup for a rainy heart. Thank you, M. Thad. June 2nd. Brought my news here because I didn't know where else to put it. The peppermint laughed at me in the right way. Liv, the tall one. August 9th. You remembered how I take it, and I remembered how to breathe. E. There were doodles, steam, a leaf, a small anchor, an indecisive cat, as well as whole paragraphs from people who don't usually leave their voices anywhere public. I recognized names from the library, names from the post office, even a name from the bench by the marina where a man reads novels with the intensity of a person overhearing their own future. I turned the pages backward and found earlier summers, some winter entries, spice as good as a wool hat, messages to May, you should charge more, underlined and then crossed out, no you shouldn't, and a corner of the page where someone had pressed a sprig of lavender thin as a line of thought. My chest did the incoherent, fluttery thing grief sometimes does when it runs into sweetness it wasn't braced for. I pressed my hand to the counter, felt the faint grit of dust under my palm, and said, "Hi, May," in the tone you use with a person you know is listening whether or not they're present. On a low round table near the window, a tin sat with a card on top. I recognized the tin itself. A biscuit tin from a Christmas years back that had proven too useful to give up. On the card, in that familiar compact script, was my name. Alexandria. Share a cup of warmth with someone who needs it. The kettle knows how to sing when it's ready. So do you. M.P.S. The jar labeled Solace is yours to start. I let the note rest against my fingertips. The sentence did the thing May's sentences always did. Bypassed my brain's instinct to make a list and went instead straight to whatever part of me had learned, in childhood, to put my cheek against the cool of the refrigerator in summer and just be held by something larger than myself. "Okay," I whispered. And then, because one kindness deserves another, I said it again, louder. "Okay." I set the tin aside and found Solace on the middle shelf, a wide jar with leaves the color of early dusk. When I cracked the lid, the scent drifted up. Chamomile and something citrus, maybe orange peel. A small hum of cardamom, of course. And a darker thread that might have been lavender, or might have been the part of me that wanted it to be. I smiled, despite my best effort at being a solemn woman in a solemn place. The counter held everything it needed to be a counter in a life that made sense. A cutting board, a jar of mismatched teaspoons, a honey pot with a wooden drizzler, a small bowl of sugar cubes hard as ideas, a tin of shortbread labeled, "For those who remember to ask." I set the kettle on, and the little blue flame coughed, then steadied, making that particular gas stove sound like someone humming under their breath to keep company with themselves. While I waited, I explored. The back room was hardly a room, more of a closet with aspirations, where I found extra jars, stacks of white cups and saucers, a crate of clean tea towels, and 3 aprons hanging on nails. One was striped, one was plain gray. One was patterned with peonies so immodest they made me blush. I chose the gray and tied it clumsily because you can be a librarian and still forget how knots work when someone is looking, even if the someone is a line of jars. In a small wooden recipe box, I found index cards edged with the oil of handling, each one a story of proportions and intention. Storm's End, the card read, for when the forecast is mean and you don't want to match it. Black tea, cracked pepper, cinnamon, a slice of orange, if the oranges haven't given up hope. Harbor Gray, for days you can't make up your mind. Earl Grey, chamomile, a whisper of vanilla. Third Tide Black, for courage that doesn't brag. Assam, tiny salt of smoked lapsang, sugar cube optional. Notes in the margins. Givey the big cup. No honey for Thad, he insists he's sweet enough. The kettle began a low murmur, then a bolder hum, and then it sang. It had a higher voice than my kettle at home, a little more urgent, like a bird who wants to be let out. I turned off the flame and warmed 2 cups because the note had said share, and I've learned it is best not to argue with kindness once it has taken the trouble to become specific. The door chime made the quietest question of a sound as someone walked by and paused. I glanced up. Through the lace, I could make out the shape of a woman with a bright scarf, the kind you wear when you're pretending it isn't cold because your heart is more stubborn than your skin. She peered at the sign, the curtains, and then at me through the glass, uncertain of the difference between privacy and invitation. I set the cups on the counter in plain sight and moved to the door. "We're open," I said, with the ridiculous certainty of a person who has no idea whether that's true. She smiled in surprise and stepped in, wrapping the brightness of her scarf tighter for 1 second, and then letting it go as the warmth of the place met her. Up close she was maybe mid-50s, with eyes that have seen the town change and still choose to love it, and a messenger bag crosswise over her coat like she might burst into useful errands at any time. "I thought this place closed ages ago," she said, voice low as if not wanting to startle the jars. "I used to come with my mother when I was a teen. Your Aunt May, right? She gave free tea to anyone who looked like they needed it and wouldn't say so." The woman laughed gently, which, to be honest, was most of us. "That sounds like her," I said, and introduced myself. "I'm Alexandria, her niece." Her eyes warmed in that way people's eyes do when their private history meets your public one. "Clara," she said, "I live 2 blocks over. I walk this way on purpose. Habit is a kind of prayer, I suppose. Would you—" I gestured to the cups. "I'm about to pour. It's a blend called Solace." I lifted the jar, let her lean in to smell. The corners of her mouth softened. "I could do with that," she said. and the bell above the door, in solidarity, clicked as though wind had agreed. I measured leaves into the infuser, too much, then some back, then just right, and poured the boil. Steam rose like a curtain on a stage that knows better than to be dramatic. We stood for a moment, the particular pause of waiting for water to do its work. I moved the guest book closer, brushed dust from the leather with the side of my hand. "My aunt left a note," I said, feeling suddenly shy of the fact that I had brought grief into a room already full of other people's stories. Suggested I share a cup with someone who needed it. Clara's gaze went soft and precise all at once, like a good question. "Then I'm lucky I walked by," she said. "And so are you." We sat at the small table by the window, cups cradled in that exact grip people use when they're polite with heat and need what it's offering anyway. I let the first sip find me. Chamomile softened the edges, the citrus lifted, the cardamom snuck in at the end like a wink. There was indeed a hum of lavender. It was tea meant for rib cages and thresholds. My aunt used to tell people things without making them feel told at, I said, surprising myself by how easily the words came. She left me, well, I tapped my pocket. Keys. Each one seems to open something I didn't know we shared. Clara nodded in the slow way that says she's already halfway to understanding. She saw people, she said. Not just the parts they manage. I was 19, had a head full of bees, and she gave me Storm's End without asking a single question. Sat right there and told me about the time she almost moved to the city and didn't, and how sometimes the life you think you're missing would have been the one that missed you. I felt the tea and her words braid together into something sturdy. Outside, Maple Street carried on, someone arguing gently with a toddler, a bicycle bell, a delivery truck that refused to be stealthy. Inside, the shop made a small, generous container for breath. "Will you sign the book?" I asked, gesturing. It feels right to keep the line going. Clara grinned. "Only if you do, too." She stood, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote with decisive loops, January 14th. The tea is still here, and so is the company. Thank you, May. And thank you, Alexandria. Clara, 2 blocks over. She drew a small scarf in the corner, ridiculous and perfect. I took the pen and drew a breath because that is my superstition with all firsts. January 14th. First cup poured. First kindness offered back, learning to listen to the kettle and to myself. A, I added in small letters at the bottom. For anyone who needs it, take a cube, take a seat. We didn't talk about everything. We didn't have to. She told me her mother had died last spring, that winter had felt like an echo of that, even though calendars pretend they know the difference. I told her my aunt had a storage shed by the dunes where the ocean keeps secrets for people who bring them with respect. She said she'd stood by that shed once and pressed her forehead to the wood and felt steadier for no good reason. We sipped, we warmed, we let the quiet do its share. When she left, she hugged me the way you hug a person who has just done something tender without making a fuss. At the door, she paused, hand on the whale wedge. "You know," she said, "it wouldn't take much to open for real. A sign, a broom, a list of 3 teas and a timer you trust. People don't come here for fancy. They come for not lonely." "I'm a librarian," I said. "I know how to make a room quiet and interesting. Maybe I can make a pot of tea that does the same." She smiled as if I'd answered a quiz correctly that I hadn't realized I was taking. "I'll spread the word," she said, softly. After she left, the place held her shape for a minute like chairs do, like cups do, like grief does before it learns how to become a friend. I stood, tied the apron a little tighter, and looked around. My hands wanted a task. My aunt's note slid cool against my fingers as if to say, "This is the task." I found a broom and started at the front, sweeping dust toward the doorway in a careful tide. Dust, I've decided, is just memory that forgot where it was going. It's grateful to be reminded. I wiped the jars with a tea towel until their labels read true. I cleaned the window glass and watched Maple Street fall into focus. The barber gesturing with scissors, a teenager practicing a kickflip, failing beautifully, an older couple arguing amiably about pears. On the chalkboard with the chalk nubs in a chipped blue saucer, I wrote, "Today, Solace, Storm's End, Harbor Gray, pay what you like or don't take what you need. Leave what you can tea with company." My handwriting will never be as brave as May's. My letters behave too well. But the words stood up for themselves. I propped the door open a little wider, and the bell hum-clicked as though approving the additional oxygen. A man paused outside, peered in like a raccoon evaluating a shiny thing, then moved on. A teenager walked by twice, slower the second time. A woman with paint on her wrists pressed her nose to the glass, laughed at herself, and came in with the exact face people make when they've decided to let a day change them. I poured her Harbor Gray. She told me she had been stuck on the underpainting of a skyscape for 3 days and named this cup Decent Clouds. We agreed Decent Clouds is underrated. Between cups, I wandered the shelves as though they were a new kind of book. Orchard Dusk had tiny apple bits, cinnamon bark, something floral that in a different life might have been a secret. Candlelight smelled like almond and story time. Forgiveness had licorice root and mint and a stern note on the card. "Give this only when asked for by name." I found another note for me taped inside the cabinet where the cups lived. "You don't have to do everything. Just this cup." Then the next one. Then rest. M. I touched the edge of it as if I could touch her. The grief that lived in my chest like a stone had, over the past days, been weathered at the shoreline. Here, in the small, breathing warmth of water and leaves and company, it rearranged again into something I could hold without cutting my hand. At some point in the afternoon, the kettle clicked itself off and I didn't hear it, lost in stacking saucers, and the bell over the door trilled in a way that felt familiar. I looked up, and it was Thad from the library. Always returns his books exactly on time, always acts like it's a conspiracy that we forgive fines. He blinked when he saw me. "You?" he said, a smile sneaking up and taking over his whole face. "Of course it's you." "Sit," I said before he could be polite and flee. "Have you ever tried Storm's End?" He laughed a surprised bark. "Have I ever needed Storm's End?" he said, and I poured. By 4 the winter light had gone gentle and the doorbell chimed like a metronome set to human tempo. Not a rush, never a rush. Just a slow threading of people into a room that remembered how to hold them. I kept glancing at the guest book as if it might slide its way open to a particular page and give me an instruction. It just lay there, approved of. When I finally sat again, toward closing, I poured myself another cup of solace and opened the book to today's page. The entries made a chorus. January 14th. Your aunt used to give this to me when I forgot I wasn't alone. I'm glad the tea remembers. January 14th. Decent clouds. R. Paint on wrists. January 14th. I didn't know I needed this. That's my favorite kind of knowing. T. The library one. January 14th. More of this, please. Someone who will sign later. I added my own at the bottom because it seemed right to bookend. January 14th. The kettle sang. I heard it. If you need a cup, come sit. If you don't, come sit anyway. A. As I wiped the counter and set cups to dry, I thought of the garden gate and the stone bench and the box that had waited for me longer than I deserved. I thought of the teal shed and the letter that had turned my chest into a room with open windows. Keys, yes. Locks, yes. But what May had really left were places where my life could become more itself. I locked the door at dusk, the key turning with that small, satisfied click that lives halfway between sound and feeling. On the sidewalk, I paused. Maple Street had put on its evening face. Lamps coming on in windows, a woman drawing a shade, a kid twirling in the spill of light like a thought deciding to stay. I slipped the Maple Street key back into my pocket, nestling it against seashell and garden gate. The weight of them was particular, solid, right. On impulse, I crossed to the seamstress's window and smiled at the pinned dresses like friends waiting for the right moment to be necessary. The bell above her door jingled in counterpoint with mine, and the sound made a small braid in the air. On the walk home, I felt taller. which is ridiculous for a person my age and bone situation, but there it was. The sense that my spine had remembered a truth it had once known. I carried the kettle's song with me and the murmur of Maple Street at 4 p.m., and the way Clara had wrapped the word habit in care, and the small bravery of inviting someone in when you could as easily have pretended the bell was broken. Back at the apartment, the desk waited in its sun wedge, less like furniture than a companion who holds space without requiring conversation. I set the day down the way you set down a bag after a trip you're grateful to have taken. Then I opened the secret panel and returned the Maple Street key to the cigar box. 3 keys now, their tags a line of intentions. Share a cup of warmth with someone who needs it. I read from May's note again, the words working their way deeper each time. I placed the note with the others in the center pigeonhole. There was a new steadiness in me that wasn't denial and wasn't distraction. It was the kind of steadiness you get when the task fits the hand. On an index card I wrote, Maple Street, Findings, Tea Shop with Jars, Harbor Gray, Solace, Storm's End, etc. Guest book of loyal customers. Notes from years back to today. Note from May. Share a cup of warmth with someone who needs it. Neighbor Clara confirms May gave free tea to lonely townsfolk. Action taken, brewed solace, shared with Clara, opened door, chalkboard sign. Result, small stream of company, grief behaved, feeling, taller, useful, held below that because I am who I am, I added. Next, Tuesday. And for you, not yet. I pressed the card flat and paused with my pen still in hand because I could hear it. Beneath the building's old bones and the radiator's polite clank and the distant radio of a neighbor who loves the golden hour more than the song he's playing. The kettle singing from memory. The ocean hush carrying it. My aunt's laughter tucked into both like sugar that refuses to dissolve all at once. My grief didn't leave. It shifted seats, scooting over to make room for a new companion. Purpose, not with a capital P. Nothing that demanded a banner or a post announcing my intentions. Just a pot, a cup, a door you can push with your palm, a bell that says, come in if you feel like it, stay if you can stand it, leave when you need to, return whenever you remember how to. Good work, I told the desk, which is a ridiculous thing to say to a desk and absolutely the right thing, and then, because it was Tuesday, which I only noticed when I glanced at the small calendar tacked to the wall, I lifted the key with that tag and turned it once in my hand. Its teeth caught the light with a particular suggestion. Soon, I said, and the room, the keys, and whatever part of my aunt speaks in the hinge sigh of opening doors, answered with a quiet that felt exactly like yes. Some locks don't announce themselves. They wait, patient as a tide, until you've wandered far enough in your own life to notice them. The For You key had been sitting in the cigar box for weeks. its brass tag catching the light like it was trying to speak in Morse code. I'd touched it plenty of times, run my thumb over the stamped letters, turned it so its teeth gleamed. But each time I'd set it back, certain it belonged to something I hadn't yet found. I'd looked everywhere in town, tried it in the post office's old brass drop box, the padlock on the community garden shed, even the creaky storage door behind the library, the one with the dangerous step that has already claimed 3 ankles. No luck. Each failed attempt made me feel a little foolish, like a child wandering with a puzzle piece, holding it up to every picture in the room. It wasn't until a rainy Sunday morning, with the shop still closed and the scent of yesterday's tea lingering in the air, that I realized I'd been ignoring the most obvious place of all, the desk itself. The desk had been there from the start, May's desk, my desk now. The first gift, the one that began all the others. I'd polished its wood, opened its drawers, run my fingers along its pigeonholes, and discovered the secret panel behind its molding. But I'd never looked closely at the small compartment tucked into the back corner of the middle drawer. A little box of wood with a lock so small it looked decorative. I'd assumed it was just another old-fashioned flourish. Now, sitting there with the rain pattering on the shop's window, I reached for the "For You" key. The tag swung gently from its cotton string as if nodding toward the drawer. "You've been here the whole time," I murmured, the way you might speak to a friend you finally recognize in a crowd. The lock was tiny, no bigger than the width of my little fingernail. The key slid in easily, almost too easily, as if it had been waiting for the weight of my hand. I turned it. The mechanism gave a soft, reluctant click, and the compartment door popped forward by a fraction. I opened it. Inside lay a single cloth-bound journal, deep blue and worn smooth along the edges, as if May had run her hands over it many times. Tucked against it was an envelope, sealed but unmarked except for those 2 words in her handwriting. "For you." My chest tightened in that strange way that grief has. It wasn't pain exactly, but something sharper than air, something that made my breath come slow. I lifted the journal first. Its spine sighed when I opened it, and the scent of paper and faint lavender rose like a memory. May's handwriting covered the pages in her steady, unhurried style. The entries weren't dated, just separated by a small dash, as if time itself didn't matter. Some were short. Kindness doesn't always look like tea and company. Sometimes it's leaving someone alone in peace until they're ready to be found. If you notice something beautiful, tell someone. If you can't tell someone, write it down. Beauty grows in the telling. Others were longer, small essays about afternoons spent in the garden, the satisfaction of sanding a piece of wood smooth, or her memories of people who had sat across from her in the tea shop. And then, scattered throughout, were pieces of me. Alexandria, age 6, digging in the dirt and asking if worms know each other by name. Alexandria, age 11, inventing a tea blend she called Snow Weather, mint, vanilla, and a pinch of winter, whatever that means. Alexandria, age 19, sitting on the bench outside the shop after a bad day, staring at her hands like they'd failed her. I brought her a cup of solace without asking what had happened. She didn't say thank you, but she finished every drop. I didn't realize I was crying until a drop hit the page. At the back of the journal was a list titled Keys I Haven't Given Her Yet, with notes beside each. Garden Gate, First Memory, Seashell, Listen to the Ocean. Maple Street, Share Warmth, Tuesday, Still to Come, and For You, with only this written beside it, the one she'll carry forward. My hands trembled as I set the journal down and reached for the envelope. The seal cracked gently under my thumb, and the letter slid free. It was a single page, her handwriting familiar enough now to feel like a voice. My dearest Alex, if you're reading this, you've followed the trail. You've opened doors, not just here, but inside yourself. The keys were never just for locks. They were for moments, for noticing, for remembering that you belong not only to yourself, but to the weave of others. I cannot tell you which door comes next. That one you choose. I only ask that you keep making keys, real or not, for the people who need them. Leave them where they can be found. Write letters without expecting answers. Keep your desk by a sunny window and let it hold whatever you can't say out loud yet. Now go make your own. All my love, May. I read it 3 times before setting it back in the envelope. The rain outside had softened, and the shop felt warmer somehow, though I hadn't moved to stoke the kettle. The grief I'd been carrying, sharp and heavy in those first days, had shifted over these weeks. Now it felt like something woven in, part of the fabric, but no longer dragging me under. I looked around the shop, the chalkboard with today's blends still scrawled in uneven letters, the small table by the window where Clara and I had shared that first cup of solace, the guest book filling steadily with words from strangers and neighbors alike. May had left me a trail of doors to walk through, each one opening to some part of her and some part of myself I hadn't known I'd misplaced. And now she was handing me the last one, not to step through, but to build from. That night, I made my decision. The next morning, I unlocked the shop early. I brewed a pot of Storm's End for myself, tied on the plain gray apron, and pulled the desk from my apartment into the corner by the front window. It fit as if it had been designed for the space. Sunlight pooled on its surface like it had been waiting for years to fall there. I set the journal and the For You letter inside its main drawer. Then, in the pigeonholes, I began placing my own envelopes, blank on the outside for now, each one waiting for the right words. I'd already decided. Some would hold letters of encouragement, some a tea recipe, some a simple sentence meant to be found at the right time. Alongside them, I placed small keys I'd collected over the years, each tagged with a single word: courage, rest, begin, stay. By mid-morning, Clara stopped in for her usual harbor gray. She spotted the desk immediately. "Looks right here," she said, resting her hand on the polished wood. "What's it for?" "For making keys," I said, and she tilted her head but didn't ask me to explain. She knows by now that some answers aren't meant to be immediate. Business that day was steady in the gentle way this shop prefers. People drifting in, warming their hands, signing the guest book. I poured tea, listened, laughed, and when it felt right, I'd slip one of my envelopes into someone's bag or coat pocket. No explanations, just keys for doors they didn't know were waiting. In the late afternoon, a patch of sunlight reached across the floor to touch the desk. I paused in the middle of wiping the counter to watch it, the gold catching on the edge of the "For You" key now hanging on a small hook above the desk. I could almost hear May's voice in the stillness. "Now go make your own." I smiled. Not the fragile smile of those early days, but something steadier. The desk would stay here by the window, drawers filling with my own letters and keys. One day someone else might open them, might follow a trail I hadn't even realized I'd left. And maybe they'd find their own doors inside themselves. For now, I poured another cup of solace, sat at the desk, and began to write. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the street glistened like it had been polished. Inside, the desk waited, not for the next key, but for the next story. And this time, I'd be the one to leave it. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night until next time.